to very destroy religious is one thing, but it's also an illusion to think that all the countries like that. And we understand certain deviation, certain distortion which comes with media and the internet. But I do think that one of the things that this war and Russian invasion showed is how many people who have true empathy all over the world, and therefore we keep saying thank you for coming, thank you for thinking about us, in a situation when, for example, the attention goes down, etc. Just one remark, that if there is an air raid siren, we go through this door to the underground, to the parking station, and we continue having fun there. So let me start from this first question, and maybe Nona will start with you. If you look at today's international world, I think it would be a general question to all of you. I will start with Nona, but you feel free to answer it as well. I have the impression that we went through several stages of thinking about democracies in the past decades. The first stage was the famous Fukuyama's end of history, which was actually saying that there is no viable alternative to liberal democracies. The second stage was in the early 2000s, where democracies were clearly under the attack, when there was attack on Twin Towers, when democracies looked, especially American one, looked shaky. But still there was this idea, okay, we can just beat them, we can just make war on terrorism, everything will be fine, we should be just a little bit cruel, and maybe lie a little bit, but everything will be okay. And then the reaction to this by intellectuals like Jürgen Habermas, or especially French and German intellectuals, was, what the hell are you doing, right? What the hell, why are you invading Iran? Why are you invading the other countries? And then there was the split between the Western Europe and the American ones. I mean the Western European, primarily.
All Europe.
Yeah, we can say, except for the Brits and Spain and Portugal. But then, and it still had this illusion that, well, democracies are strong. There is some tiny terrorist somewhere. You need to make a little war against them and everything will be fine. So there was this illusion that there is still giants against liliputs. And then this illusion creates that misunderstanding what was going on in Russia. Because Russia showed that it can accumulate resources by the state, very rich in resources state, and very militarized. And then when Georgians and Ukrainians, the Moldovans, Poles were saying about this, that democracies are in danger, democracies were saying, come on, let's keep freedom of speech, everything will be fine, etc. So there was not this feeling of danger, there was not this feeling of a threat. And suddenly we appeared in a situation when democracies seem to be weaker than authoritarian regimes. Then there is so many vulnerabilities inside, and I think these 2010s and especially 2020s are a sign of this. And sometimes I feel that democracies are, okay, we are weak, we can do nothing about it, we cannot wage war with Russia. Suddenly it appeared that the enemy of democracy is too strong. So initially it was too weak, now it's too strong, so with too weak we fight with a little counter-terrorist war, with too strong we don't fight. And this is kind of course, create this discrepancy. When Ukrainians think and act about this, because we do think that democracies can defend themselves, that democracies are stronger than autocracies because we take the level of risk and responsibility. But do you have this impression in your country?
Which country? Georgia?
I will clarify. First of all, thank you. I wanted to thank PEN Ukraine for giving us this opportunity to visit Ukraine in wartime. For me, it's not first time. I have been here since the Maidan. I have lots of friends in Ukraine, but it's the first time in a wartime. And more generally, the most challenging thing now for me is not about debating democracy, because in any way now we risk to lower the level of discussion after the lecture here from Timothy Schneider. So
We share this feeling.
yeah, the most challenging basic now is getting emotional in expressing my gratitude to Ukrainian people for their fight for freedom. We were talking last 2 hours for fighting for their freedom, for our freedom, and in our, I mean, my Georgian origins, and we are people colonized last 2 centuries. And I mean also me as a European, because this is the fight also for Europe, and this is the fight also for democracy, because let me put it simply, because then after all, I'm not a philosopher, I'm not even an academic, I'm a think tanker, and the task of a think tanker is to put in a simple words the lectures the academics and philosophers are doing for politicians. Otherwise, we risk they don't understand and get the difficult concept. And for me, democracy is about freedom, freedom of choice, and of choice not being hopelessness, as Timothy put it, and this is true not only for Ukraine, it is true for Georgia, it is true for Moldova, it is true for Armenians. And I saw that the First Lady of Armenia is today here in order to bring humanitarian assistance to Ukraine, and this is a huge geopolitical turn also in the region, because Russia was supposed to be a security ally of Armenia, and somehow Ukrainian fight for freedom is inspiring also today Armenia and Armenian people. I'm only sorry, and I'm hopeful also for democracy. I'm still hopeful because you have to consider that I'm an East European expert, working on UN neighborhoods since 2008, and my experience was the experience of frustration of East European expert, because it was about considering us all crazy when we were talking about that democracy was in danger. No, it's frustration about us being in some way also marginalized in the expert community by the Westerners, by the way, no, because they somehow were thinking that we were playing victims, that we somehow decided to live the past but not future, and decided to complain every single moment about our history, about our present, about the occupation. And by the way, we in Georgian have also the word for the occupation. There is a word for the occupation also in Georgia. And actually now it turns out that we were right. We all were right. But I'm so sorry that it took so lot of Ukrainian lives in order to make others understand that they had to listen us when we were warning, where we were saying that democracy was in danger, and that we have to defend it. I think that having said that, somehow the EU has realized the danger, and I still want to give the credit to the EU to its response to Ukraine war, because that kind of unity, that kind of consolidation, that kind of political decision with delay, with a lot of reflections, still it came, and still today Ukraine fights with help of European weapons, with help of European finance assistance, and I think that somehow the crisis, and before the war there was a pandemic, somehow it was a wake-up call for Europe to defend democracy. The challenges are still there. Timothy was speaking about the post-truth, and it was already back in 2016, Oxford Dictionary somehow selected a word of year, and it was post-truth. And it is an era where there is no truth, there is only misinformation. And this is something we are experiencing is daily basis in Italy, because disinformation and fake news remains a huge problem. It was rampant during the COVID period, and it is only present in during this war. It is something that I'm experiencing during my participation in talk shows or addressing or countering disinformation on daily basis on the social media. How can we deal with this? I think, first of all, with education, with kind of starting educating to media literacy, also the audience, with fact-checking, because, as Timothy again was saying, the kind of the attitude towards freedom, it starts from childhood. And I think that in these challenging times, we have to pay much attention to educate the new generations with right values. But in order to select the values, we have to be free enough, no? And this not to be free enough actually is not only a problem for Russia, it's also a problem for many people in Europe, you know. And when, for example, in Italy, some would argue that the most important thing now in Ukraine is to save lives and let's reach ceasefire. They somehow do not understand that for us who have been colonized, the absolute value is freedom, not life. Life comes after. And somehow, I don't know, maybe because those are generations who already have burned in a free context. So maybe for them it is a given value. While for us it was something to conquer and something for which we are fighting for. And this is what I try to explain them on daily basis, and this is how I try to give also my small contribution to the Ukraine's war for freedom.
Thank you. Thank you. This time, I want to refer to the wonderful cover. Can we get this cover? But I will just show. Sure. And the cover was made by Agrafka, right? Yeah. It's made by Agrafka, the famous designer's team, Ukrainian. It's called Omagia al Ukraina. And you see this wonderful images, and there is a baby, the baby holding against these bombs and tanks. So there is this metaphor that all the society, including the babies, are against this invasion. On the one hand, we had also this impression in the beginning stages of the war. On the other hand, we increasingly have the impression, let's be like very, very frank and maybe tough on that in Ukraine, there are kind of not the whole society is perceiving this as a total war, as the war of the whole society. So we see different stratas. We see more active people, less active people, and those people who actually see it as a computer game. And that's a big danger. But at the same time, when we look at Europe, one thing when I'm telling, like, this is how common we are with Georgians or with Poles or with Baltic countries. But it's completely another thing when I tell this in German. Or maybe in Italy, I didn't try. that this is a common war, that this is our war, our common Europe's war, that Europe is in danger, that Europe actually becomes, Tim Snyder was saying that Europe set up itself when empires lost the wars. But there is another side of Europe, this anti-imperial idea of Europe. Because the idea of, United States of Europe was emerging in the 19th century is precisely, we should build something else than empires. But I don't have the impression that people have this idea that this is our common war. And I don't know how is it in Italy, whether it's realistic to talk to people about this, that your help to us is not a humanitarian assistance, that this is, you kind of a part of it. It's not like we going here in Ukraine to the front lines and bringing them cars and saying this is our humanitarian assistance to you. No, we understand that these people are fighting there and very often losing their lives. So this is probably a tiny thing that we can do and we should do more. So what about Italy? Does it still perceived as a kind of Ukraine conflict, Ukraine war, as it's often portrayed?
That's the reason we made that cover, the homage, the tribute to Orwell, and a direct reference to what's happened in Europe in the 1930s. Because the reference is the title homage to Catalonia by George Orwell. But let me first begin with I would like to express my personal condolences for your loss, the loss of your colleague and your friend. And as Nora said, I'm very glad to be here, and I'm very happy that you invited us. For us, it is an opportunity to see what. I mean, yesterday we went to Irpin and Busha. We knew, every single of us knew every single frame of the bridge, the shelling of the buildings, everything. We knew, of course, we are in this business, we saw the pictures, but being there, seeing with our own eyes, we kind of felt something different. So it was moving, and I really thank you. And I disagree with you, Volodymyr, when you said that we are brave. We are not brave at all. We are just doing. We are trying to do our job, and I actually.
Ukrainians say you're brave. You're brave.
Okay, I cannot disagree with Ukraine, but no, actually we are in awe with looking at what you are doing every single day. Most of the people at PEN this morning asked us about our first night with the sirens and the alarms, and we went to the air shelter, and of course it was scary. But if you think about it, it was nothing comparing on what you are experiencing every day, on your new normality. And so again, we are in awe because you are fighting for your independence, you are fighting for your life, and you are fighting also for us, for European. And that's something that now I can answer your question. Yes, in Italy, it's very difficult to say this. This is our common cause. Each of us are trying to do our best to advance Ukrainian cause. Of course, the environment, the media environment is very difficult for us because the influence of Russian propaganda is very big. Sometimes it's direct propaganda from the Kremlin. Sometimes it's not. Sometimes it's rooted in our culture, political culture. As we said 2 days ago, dinner. Italy had the most important, the biggest communist party in the Western world until 1991. And so our culture, our political culture, is the Communist Party, Italian Communist Party, got around 30% of the votes for decades. So it's part of our political tradition that, you know, Russia maybe is right. And so it's very difficult to do this, but we fight back. We are trying to do our job is trying to explain to our readers, to our citizens that this is our common cause. And Yarina Grusha is here, and I'd like to tell you, you already know, but I would like to tell you, our audience, that not only we publish and run articles, editorials, comments about the war, but since last year we launched the first European daily newspaper, digital daily newspaper about Europe written in Ukrainian language. It's called Slava Evropi. I'm sorry for my pronunciation, or maybe it's better than my English pronunciation. And so we are trying to do our best. Every single of us is doing the best to, you know, trying to explain to our readers that this is our common cause. Why it's difficult? I told you about the communist part, but if you, I mean, in these days here in Kiev, we had meetings with officials from the government, and the first thing they told us, your prime minister is great. Giorgia Meloni, our first female prime minister. She's great, she's a very pro-Ukrainian politician, we love her. And in part, they are right, because she's very pro-Ukraine since she became Prime Minister in last October. But she leads our coalition of government. The government is formed by 3 parties. Right before February 24, all of those 3 parties were propagandists for Kremlins. Her party, Fratelli d'Italia, which is a former neo-post-fascist party. Berlusconi's party, maybe you know that he was, because he passed away, very close to Vladimir Putin. And Lega Nord, led by this guy called Salvini, who is, I mean, it's like, how do you, what's the name of, the propagandist on Russian TV. It's like, yeah, it's like Solomon, it's like him, but he's Italian. So it's really,
He speaks much more beautifully.
I don't think so. I don't think so. So the 3 parties who are in charge in Italy now, and Italy is one of the most reliable ally of the Ukrainian cause, were until months ago very, very pro-Russian. And if you go to on the opposition side, there is the Democratic Party, who has been a really reliable ally of this cause. But then, a few months ago, they changed the leadership, and the new leadership is not like, she's not like the previous leaders of the Democratic Party in expressing solidarity to Ukraine. And then there is another party, which represents 20% of the electoral vote, and it's Movimento 5 Stelle, 5-star. No, 25% of, 16. Now, thanks God, it's 16. And they, they were invited to Russia United Congress in Moscow. They organized in 2014 trips to Crimea. So if you look at the political landscape in Italy, it's very scary. And the paradox of this is that, the paradox of this is that we are bind to the former fascist leader the leader of the former fascist party. this cause. This is a paradox, of course. And why she is very pro, I think she is genuine in her support to Ukraine. First of all, because she needs a good relationship with the United States. And so she cannot, she's already against Europe, so she cannot be also against the United States. And also because she's the leader of the European Conservative Party, which is a party formed basically by the Poles, PIS, peace. And so, as you know better than anyone else, the Poles are, first of all, anti-Russian and then everything else. And so she is the leader, the president of this Conservative Party, and she cannot be the president of an international party led led by the Poles without being in the same position of the Poles. And so the situation is scary. I think she's genuine. I think she built a relationship, a friendship also with Volodymyr Zelensky, but I don't trust her because of her past, because of her roots, because of her allies, and because the big question, the front line of this ideological, not only military war we are living in, if in 2024 Donald Trump will be in the White House, it will be, of course, catastrophic, apocalyptic for everyone, for the war, but in particular for Ukraine and I think for Europe. And if someone like Trump will be in the White House next year, I think our leader, she will turn and she will change her position. So I think that front line is where the front line is here, and the other front line is to try to counter the Russian propaganda in the Western society, but the other front line is the American presidential election.
I sometimes give dark jokes to the Europeans and they don't know how to respond. I said, okay, Trump wins the election and then he withdraws from NATO. He says, bye-bye, NATO, bye-bye.
He wanted to do this, actually.
And then what happens to Europe? So Europe
We are not
understands
strong enough
that it is completely unprotected. Okay, you have France with nuclear power. And this is probably the country which can protect the European Union. France is the only nuclear power in the European Union after the Brits left. And this is the type of thinking which is kind of realistic because we Ukrainians are accustomed to the idea, imagine the worst scenario and prepare that it will be even worse than you imagine. But this is not the way how people usually tend to think, because people in the Western Europe tend to think in terms of progress, that tomorrow will be better. And then I think, for me, the question of Trump, the question of the populists in the Western Europe, the question of Brexit, which was completely misunderstood by the liberal discourse, I think. I just look at it from the distance, from the Ukrainian distance. And for me, the question is your attitude to time. If you're told that tomorrow will be better, you will be living better than your parents, everything will be fine, then it's okay. But if it's not going, you're not prepared. You're not prepared to the fact that your life will be worse than your parents. That you will pay more money for your housing, that you will be more unemployed. And I think this is what Tim was talking about, unpredictability. Actually, unpredictability is a horrible thing because you should be, and this is what taught us in Ukraine. And I always say that our key school of thought is the 90s. Because in the Western world, the 90s was the idea of the end of history, in a good sense of the term. So end of the history ended, everything is fine. For us, end of history was, wow. It's like,
And now?
it's end of history, so what you gonna do next? And it taught us to be adaptive. And good things and bad things, because it goes in both directions. So I do think that we need to think about it in these terms, like, okay, what would Europe do if Trump says there's no hate? Let me address to Paolo and Davide and ask.
Paolo is very expert on Europe, so you can ask.
Yeah, and ask. Okay, I will ask them Paolo about Europe, because I would like to. I was thinking of asking the question of media and journalists, but then maybe I will address that. So I had the impression, and we Ukrainians had the impression, that Europe Brussels was leading much more than the nation states. So that suddenly Ursula von der Leyen was more kind of vocal and powerful and charismatic and outspoken than certainly Scholz, Macron, even maybe Meloni, and etc. And this, from our side, so we don't follow European affairs that intensively, but from my side, it was for the first time in the history of the European institutions when this idea of the boring, grey color, bureaucratic technocrats was completely reversed. Is that true? Do you have this impression?
Yes, my answer is yes. As they did before me, I want to thank you. Because today was a sad day for you. I give you my condolences, and you were still very caring and answering all my thousands questions that I had in these days. And I was very curious, and I made very personal questions, and you were all very kind to answer and to explain. And so my visit in Kiev it's my first time here in Ukraine. I've been writing about Ukraine from 2014. So I thought I won't be too much surprised, and I am. So I want to thank you, because all these meetings and conversation gave me another. I had some ideas. I write every day those ideas, but I have like kind of illumination, because I saw the real life. I think that. As they said before, our situation in Italy is gloomy. I won't defend our prime minister or our government, but I think that the way that we have to fight, it's not just talking about or writing about democracy or, big ideas, because it's too polarized, it's too political, and you end up every moment, in every debate, in every TV shows, in every social fight, with like an enemy thing. You can discuss things, and I think this war is very clear. So I don't want to tell too much or analyze too much the geopolitical thing, because I think it's very clear. But I wanted to humanize this war. So I try to explain your real life, your everyday life. That's why I was asking those very personal questions. I wanted to understand and then explain to our readers and our public debate how time is changing you, because I know it's changing us and Western countries, of course, and I want to understand how it's changing you, because without you, we have a problem. And this is the big difference from Kyiv and another European capital. and I want to write it like many thousand times. It's that you are in war and we are not. So this is a big difference. And sometimes when we talk about normality, and we see those kind images from Kiev that you are going to have your life, it seems like the war is over. And it's just like in the eastern country or in the southern countries that in our public debate is just, a rural part of Ukraine, like no man's land without people. So I think that this is important. It's important to explain and humanize this war, because we can, of course, agree or disagree about the democracy and the future of democracy and the strength of democracy, but the desire of freedom of people, I think, is the most important fuel of our work. So, about Europe, you are also pessimistic about Europe. I mean, you are enjoying us, joining us. So we are so happy to have you with us. And if I have to be pessimistic, I will be more pessimistic about America than Europe, because it's really a broken country. I don't want to say that Europe is like a paradise. Of course, it's not. But I think that it works better in emergency. So it's this paradox that we have to be prepared, because there are so many things that we knew before. The Russian threat was so clear for many people, so we had to be prepared, and we weren't. But then when something really serious happens, I think that Europe is has a great capacity of reaction. We had the same during the pandemic, and we had with the invasion, and I was really surprised.
So you are much more like us. So what is the common thing between Ukraine and the European Union? No, you wake up when something happens.
Yes, I think that this paradox is European Union was created to work in peace, and it worked well, I must say, during the war. My concern is time. My concern is time for you guys, and because this big difference between Russia and Ukraine, and I think regime and democracy, that this is the value of human being. So we give a great value to human being, the Russians don't. And in a war, in a cruel war, in a terrorist war, this is it could make some difference. And this concerns me, because of course the human capital here is just yours, not ours. And I'm worried about the time passing. And I'm worried, of course, about our unity, European and American unity. When we're talking about our government, it's the classical example of cracking. That you see that this unity can crack somewhere. And my only consolation is that populism and nationalism and this kind of movement in Europe didn't work well. Brexit was a disaster. And Agnes Heller, the philosopher, the Hungarian interview to my newspaper that the only thing that we have to remember is that populists will end up fighting each other. And she said, kicking each other's ass. So I think that this is the real thing for regime in the alliance of autocracies that I think they can't resist in Italia, and for populist movement. Of course, we have to be careful with our democracy.
It's interesting. The people from Western Europe and from America, I just all the time, I just complete the opposite to the image of people that I described in the 90s, because therefore, okay, tomorrow will be better, everything will be fine, so we relax. Now it's like clear idea, everybody says, no, tomorrow will be worse. Be prepared for that. And you know the joke, what is the difference between optimist and pessimist, right? So the pessimist says, oh, things are so bad, it can't be worse, and the optimist says, it can't be, So I think there is also this change, the thing that I'm trying also to deliver to my colleagues from European Union, from America, that there is also a question of faith, right? Whether you believe in yourself, whether you believe in what America is and what Europe is. And I do think that the key thing about Ukraine right now is that lots of people believe in Ukraine. While there is not so much empirical evidence, you should believe in that, because roads are still not very good. Architecture sometimes is horrible. People are not very polite. But then you understand how people are mobilized and how they really share this thinking and action, and how we share this life. And this is something that I keep thinking, that belief, not religious belief, but just belief in something, just comes out of something very unexpected. So it doesn't come from the empirical life. So you can live in paradise and say, tomorrow will be hell, let's prepare for that. Or you can be living in hell and say, yeah, we're fighting for paradise. So it's interesting how these dynamics change, but I do hope that, and this is what Russians are playing, because the Russians are saying Europe is decadent, look at them, they don't have a future, etc. But we see that in Europe there is all 100 years there is repetition of that, because 100 years ago we had the same. Everybody, Spengler was saying the decline of the West, etc. So my thing is, let's believe in Europe, and let's believe in democracy, and let's believe in, and sometimes belief really is able to change. Davide, I want to ask you, and maybe my friends here, French journalist Gulliver and Stefan, maybe you will later during this conversation, because my understanding in the attention to Ukraine went down significantly in media, and it's very, very difficult to talk about Ukraine. So Ukraine kind of became one of the topics, not the major topic. People just focused on that through 2022, and then they moved away, because I understand people cannot live totally in the Ukrainian topic. Is this true? And if this is true, what should we do about it? What should we Ukrainians do about it? How can we kind of maybe spread more stories, more humane stories, as Paolo mentioned? What do you think?
Well, first of all, I'm very sorry for the loss, and I'm very thankful to have this opportunity, not just tonight to talk with you and to talk with all of you, but also for all these days and meeting so many interesting people and having so many interesting experience. I see that you're asking me a very easy question. Thank you. It's so simple to answer that.
Philosophers don't ask complicated questions.
I think that the easy answer, the most easy answer to your question, to how to create again more interest in what's going on here, is to get a very big military victory. That would be the easiest thing.
The easiest answer to the easy question.
But I can talk, of course, I can talk about Italy because that's the media sphere that I know. And what I have to say is that I don't think that Ukraine disappeared from the front pages of newspaper as much as you would suppose in any other occasion. I don't remember any other conflict in which after almost 2 years, the news about the conflict was so present in TV, on the newspaper, on the website. There's still a lot of interest. It's not the same as in the first 6 months of the war. You have to know that the Italian media sphere is basically a circus. It's a very crazy place. I think it has no equal in Europe. It's very, you know how the Italians are. Right? Basically, imagine how we move our hands, we raise our voice, we are very loud.
But after Tim's lecture, I understand that the key thing is to be unpredictable.
Yeah, we are very,
Is it unpredictable?
we are very predictable.
We
in
lost
our
the meaning words
unpredictability.
and we forgot. So that's what.
So for example, for the 6 months of the war, the coverage in the Italian media was crazy. I remember one day in La Repubblica, which is a newspaper, which is one of the 2 main newspapers, which has like kind of 80 pages per day. I remember there were like 30 pages about Ukraine, the first 30 pages. And that's a lot. And we had like lots of talk show, lots of discussion, also lots of very, as my colleagues were saying, lots of very bad discussion. But nonetheless, Ukraine is talked a lot. And yeah, I think it's very difficult from here to change how things work in Western Europe, except doing, as you were saying, not so easy thing like doing something big, like getting a big military victory, having something big changing, and it's very difficult. I think that what you're doing here, like taking journalists from other European countries to Ukraine. Fostering this continuous kind of dialogues between Ukraine, the rest of Europe, and the United States. I don't want to sound like I'm really sincere. I think that the Ukrainians have done an incredible job in doing that. And if there is still such interest for what's going on in Ukraine, it's because geopolitics, of course, it's because Russia is considered a very dangerous, now it's considered a very dangerous and big geopolitical adversary of the West, but also because the Ukrainians have done a wonderful job in explaining what's going on here, in fostering solidarity in Europe. We know that, for example, especially Western Europe missed a key juncture in the head that Ukraine should have. I don't want to then get into the nitty-gritty of military stuff, but for example, the fact that Europe started producing artillery shells very late, and that was a key military junction that we failed. But nonetheless, if you look at history, if you look at the last 200 years, there is not an instance in which a country got so much help from other countries which were not belligerent. You know, basically like American and British and other nation planes and drones are like relying direct information to Ukrainian artillery with satellites, are getting satellite image for the Ukrainian military. Billions and billions of dollars have been sent to Ukraine. And I don't want to say that it has been perfect. As I said, we missed some very key juncture. We could have really done much more in very specific instances. I'm talking about especially last summer. If Europe would have started producing artillery shells last summer instead of this spring, probably now we were telling a different story in the southern front, a very different story. But nonetheless, I think that the Ukrainians have done something that I cannot imagine. No, I don't remember anyone has done something like that before. And so the only thing I can say is, apart from like trying to change something big, trying to do something which I know that you're already trying to do as much as you can, as best as you can. The only other thing that I would say is like keep doing what you're doing, because I think it's working.
Francesco,
let's talk about literature.
Hard task.
Because I will ask a philosophical question. I've never did it since 3 hours. I will ask a philosophical.
I'm getting the very hard part of the whole thing.
So I do have the impression that there is something going on in Ukrainian literature and Ukrainian culture, and we here at PEN Ukraine are those people who, many of our members are actually actual writers, actual poets, and we have a happiness to communicate with them and to make common events. Some of our friends and colleagues have died and were killed by the Russians. We recently presented Koordinova Bulinko's diaries, prefaced by Victoria Marina. Both of them were killed by the Russians. But at the same time, I feel that there is something very incredible in Ukrainian literature right now. Because we were struggling throughout our history of breaking through the silence that is produced by big tragedy. And I don't really like the word trauma, because trauma is a very light word to describe what countries like Ukraine have been going through. You cannot describe Holocaust as a trauma. There is something much bigger, right? You should find a different word. And I do think that throughout our history, the wound, the suffering was so big that it made you silent. So there were two pressures. One from the outside that was actually erasing all the voices of this totalitarian machine, bringing writers to camps, killing them. But there was internal force, which basically, I also think that it's a little bit psychoanalytical bullshit to say that if you talk more about the tragedy, it will disappear. No. So one of the means to protect yourself against the big suffering is to stop talking about it. Right? And this is what happened with us, I think, with the Second World War, with the Holodomor, with Holocaust here. And it's important to understand. So now it's a different thing. So I do think that Ukrainian literature, Ukrainian culture is starting finding the expression means to talk about this war. And this is something very important. I do think this is something very important for the whole European literature, for the whole history of the European literature, the world literature. That's something that needs to be paid attention to, because there is difficult relations of culture with death. On the one hand, you can say that death kills culture. On the other hand, all our culture, all our art is about, well, not all of it, but a big part of it is about death, suffering, war, wounds, etc. So you have this impression that there is something born here because of the war, something very, very remarkable that should be really read, translated, listened to.
I, of course, do have that impression, and let me start by saying that when I first visited Ukraine some months ago, it was in Lviv, and the first impression I had after I crossed the border, and by pure chance in that moment I sent a message to Yarina saying, I'm in your country finally, and in that precise moment, Yarina was with Victoria Marina. She sent me a photo of them in Venice, near to where Cortina, my hometown where my book festival is held since 2009, so we've been doing this for 14 years. And actually, she sent me a picture of them too, and I had in that precise moment a poem by Victoria Melina about your home, take it with you, keep it with you, it will grow. And we exchanged these pictures. When I tell you this now, I have shivers because it was not only a chance or a coincidence, it was some sort of a weird sign that, being a rationalist, I would usually ignore completely. But that was kind of powerful. And then, answering to your question, when I entered Lviv, I was then, let's say, welcomed by a spirit which, quoting Christian, was truly of Barcelona or Catalonia, and I feel it now, exactly now, this energy, which is incredible, and to me is a sort of almost, let's say, a surprise for my own feelings and expectations about what it was, what were things which I considered empty before, like cultural dialogue, which were beautiful bureaucratic words, which are very much used in the literary environment, especially in the Western European literary environment, because they adhere to sort of political correctness, but then usually are empty, are not sincere. And that's something very sincere came. So I will tell you what happened, especially in the past 2 years to our festival. This is the cover of Una montagna di libri for the summer, and as you can see, it's kind of morally unambiguous, but this is the result of something that we've been working on, and it started for me on the 24th of February 2022. I will admit that, differently from Paola, I was not working on Ukraine as closely and watching the situation as probably most of the people on this stage. I was, of course, interested in all the literatures of the world, but I had no culture whatsoever, about it. And the first day I had some posts on social networks, which is everywhere in the world a sick environment. In Italy is particularly sick. And I looked at something in television, which is everywhere a sick environment. In Italy is particularly sick. The talk shows, especially in Italy, are built very similarly to some talk shows maybe in the United States, as let's see the different opinions because they are all equal one to the other. So let's see who is pro-Zelensky and who is pro-Putin, The delusion, the disappointment was so big and so high, even from people that I knew, that I started with something like Gondrano, the horse in Animal Farm in Orwell. I will work more, So I started studying somehow. I started burying myself first in the stories of the Ukrainians, and then maybe devoting the festival to make people learn more in an enlightened spirit, using words to explain and not to hide. So very simple but basic concepts in which I believe. So first I had the chance to meet some intellectuals and writers, first through Yarina, to whom I am so grateful for everything, because she's a true bridge from Italy to Ukraine and back. But then also I met people, like in Lviv, I met the great Yaroslav Litsak, who was here before. He was in Cortina this summer, in front of an audience, and this is the big news, of more than 300 people, Cortina is a vacation site. You were mentioning of the different spirits. We always talk about this with Christian, about the different spirits of the 1990s in Western Europe and in Italy and in your country. For us, it was the sweet life, the dolce vita degli anni 90. A very, very, let's say, lazy time where you could feel that, yes, you were at the end of the history in a very good way and a very naive way. And we know how harsh it was in all the Soviet sphere and in Ukraine then, for many reasons. Well, Cortina is a place of sweet life. So you would expect in high season, for pretty affluent people to go there and simply relax. Instead, there were 300 people in the audience listening to Yaroslav Litsak talking about the middle class, the global middle class, the fight of the new global middle class, and some other concepts I would try to squeeze in my words. But the thing is, analogic somehow was more important than digital. Meeting people and explaining people person to person was not something naive that you tell yourself like to get some consolation from the horrible environment which is Italy, in the media environment, in the political spectrum. I subscribe to what Tristan said. It's not consolation, it's something you can build on. It's something that is working. So people ask for more. People write posts on Unamote, say, please invite more. Like Olesia Yaremchuk, who's become a friend of mine, and her book is there, and who's taught me something interesting about and relevant about the question of today. Of course, we don't have answers. I don't have answers, but how to defend democracies. I would turn it into how to make democracies work efficiently. Like what she's describing in her book is the mosaic of ethnicities which today compose Ukraine as a modern state. Let's talk about this, because that's the one way that we can connect Italian audiences to the fight of Ukraine. This is a democracy fighting for democratic values, which are not simply the love of your country. By the way, love of your country is something that in Western Europe is very hard, I believe, to really explain to audiences, because as another intellectual that you of course know, and a writer and a poet, Halina Kruk told me in Lviv when I met her, it is always very hard to explain to Western Europeans that if you love your country, you are not an extreme nationalist. Our fear of nationalism reached some idiotical degrees that we cannot even recognize anymore. What Orwell described in his books, I think, not only to Animal Farm, but I think of Coming Up for Air, beautiful book, which is about his love for England, despite all the bad aspects of England, you know. Patriotism, meaning love of your country, is a great and interesting value, which has to be rediscovered in a 19th century spirit somehow. We devoted some parts of our festival with Ritzak, and not only him, to explain this. And one last thing, we tried also to dig in the past 2 years, thanks to you, to what you are doing, and your example, incredible example to us Europeans, rediscover and reintroduce a debate about what means colonialism, because it's obvious for a Ukrainian audience that if I say colonialism, you think of the Soviet Union. It's not obvious for Western Europeans, and especially to Italians, who are a mixture of ignorance and not awareness, and simply wanting to be left in peace with their things. You know, they don't want to be charged with all these things. And we connect colonialism only to white colonialism, Rudyard Kipling, and you know, British colonialism, French colonialism in Africa. If you talk to the middle, to the common person, and we have to explain that there are so many brands of colonialism everywhere in the world. We've been speaking with Taiwanese people at Montanidi, with Hong Kongers, and at the end, it was incredible for me to travel around the world in these past months. One thing that I did before coming to Ukraine, I was in Taipei, and in Taiwan I went to a little island, and in this little island there was the office of the Democratic Party of the island, and he had a flag of Ukraine there, because he says your fight against your colonial oppressor is our fight. For Italians, this fight is very far away from our current political situation, but it's something that is very worth to still talk about. And this is something that we can do in a little festival. But I believe, as I told you before, that we can contribute to this, and I have a sort of a democratic idealism, which is also corresponding to the book idealism, you know, the literature idealism. It works, it can work, and it can permanently take someone off of the digital sick environment, because then he will rely again, or she, on books and on contacts and on seeing the faces of people, describing them a situation. And that is, I think, priceless, you know, it has great value.
Thank you. I would like to pass the floor to the people here in the room. And I'm sure you have questions, remarks, ideas. Maybe someone will sing. Yeah, I know you have many questions.
About Marx.
No, Marx. I'll try to avoid the philosophy and maybe stick to geopolitics.
Thank you.
So maybe this is a question for the European experts, but I think anybody can answer it. We started with the sort of distinction between East and Western Europe. I'm Canadian, and I could say that
You're from Eastern Europe.
Okay, well, anyway, I have connections to Eastern Europe, but there's a certain complacency in Canada, I felt, even on February 24th, 2022, that Canada is very far away from Ukraine, and we don't have the same things at stake. And you might even think that Western Europe is geographically sort of far away. But I think they're far away in a different place. That is, it's been now generations since they experienced real war, and Canada, the last time there was fighting on Canadian soil was 1812. So it's hard, I think, for these people to quite conceptualize this. So they're used to living the Dolce Vita or something, you know, their own little life without this experience. But the Eastern Europeans can't say the same thing. They have an experience of the Soviet Union and the chaos in the 90s. And so I wonder if Trump is elected in 2024, and there is this worry about can Europe and democracies defend themselves, maybe there is concern about democracies that are complacent, but maybe we need to look to former Eastern Bloc states that, in my experience, the Estonians, if they were allowed to fight right now, and they would be doing that, right? If the Poles could fight, they would actually be here fighting. In some weird way, the fact that they're in NATO prevents them from fighting this war. But if there weren't NATO, there might be hope in Eastern Europe fighting and pushing back. And France, of course, with its nuclear power. But it seems like, I'm not exactly sure where I'm going with this, but defending democracy is something that the Eastern Europeans value potentially in a way that the Western Europeans and Canadians don't, because their democracy is either not new or it hasn't been threatened in the same way. So maybe the question is there hope in defending democracy for people who understand what's at stake? And maybe the hope is in Eastern Europe and not necessarily in Western Europe.
Yes, I think that geography had a great role in the commitment of different countries, and I think that the war changed the balance in Europe for a long time, and I think that France is a little bit worried because she knows that the power and the idealistic power, so the leadership power, is shifting on east, on north, and I would say that during the war we felt UK so close to Europe that we forgot, like, all the terrible things that they said about us. Yes. So
The Brexit was not that bad.
but you know, it was yes.
It was a hell turned into.
It was a stupid thing, but they are paying their stupid choice, I think. But the war really changed in geography and the perception of this threat that UK had in a very clear way, and continental Europe didn't. I think France is like Italy. I mean, maybe not like us, but the debate is really bad. Macron, it was not so, clear. He tried to do a bridge, or, the kind of... Yes, and then he changed his mind, but I think because he received just no from Putin, so that's why he changed his mind. So France, I don't really like even Macron, that of course is the best leader France could have. I don't really like their egoism that they have in Europe, and I think that reason is that they see the power is shifting, and Baltics and Eastern countries in Europe are taking the leadership. Then we have a problem with Hungary. So this is a huge problem, as we have the unanimity process in Europe. So Viktor Orban is a problem, I think. But maybe they will change the rules, so it was not unanimity, and we can try to yes, escape Orban veto.
If I may.
I completely agree with what you said on both sides, Europe and Americans. On Europe, the problem is that Europe is not a war power, it's not a military power, because, okay, the Estonians, the Baltics, even the Sweden are maybe ready to fight, but we are not a military power. NATO is something else, and of course the supplies are mostly from the US. So the problem again is America, and I completely agree with your point. It's a generational thing. Everyone remember the presidential debate. I was covering it in the US at that time between Barack Obama and Mitt Romney in 2012. And Mitt Romney said this line, maybe you remember, there is no doubt, he said, that our most important geopolitical foe is Russia. And Obama answered, the Cold War is over, and everybody, the pundits after the debate and all the editorials, the op-eds, good newspapers like the New York Times, Washington Post, were making fun of this guy Romney with this strange and weird idea that Russia is still a problem, a threat. And the reason, okay, there's some ideological stuff inside, behind Obama's policies, but I think it's geopolitical, is generational, and also Obama is not from the East Coast, and most of the new generations of Democrats and Republicans politicians are younger than old Joe Biden, who, he sleeps as stones. He says every time we saw Joe Biden, Paul and I say, please, Joe, don't fall, no, because it seems like every time he's trying to do something bad. But Joe Biden is from another generation. He's from the East Coast, and he knows Europe, and he knows that Europe is important because the intellectual fight of the previous century were fought in Europe, and everything was in Europe, and so he knew. And with all his faults, with all his deficits, he actually saved America, he saved Europe, and he saved Ukraine until now. And so the problem would be not only, of course, with Trump or someone in his mold will be the next president, but I fear also on the left, on the Democratic side, because they are all from another generation, and they think that Europe, this kind of ideological fight against totalitarianism, is something from the past, and we have to move on. And unfortunately, we are still in this fight.
Just want to say, just a very quick thing about Poland. I don't think that the present Polish ruling elite is fighting or is helping this fight because they have any interest in democracy. Just before the war, I don't know how the process is now, but just before the war, they were being sanctioned by the European Commission because they were basically trying to put the judiciary power under control of the government. And if I don't know what they are fighting for, but I'm not sure that they want to live in Polish, not in Polish Europe, but in actual Polish leadership Europe, because it's a place where you cannot have an abortion, where your civil liberties are very curtailed, and other stuff. So
I guess I take your point. I guess so. Maybe the Poles would fight. I take your point. I guess maybe the Poles would fight to prevent being under Russian or something like Soviet.
The next one in line.
Yeah. So geography less than democracy and history. But I guess I was the premise of the meeting was sort of defending democracy, and my sense is that at least in Eastern Europe, people, maybe the Poles are tricky here, but they seem more willing to defend and fight for democracy because I think they understand what's at stake in a way that the Ukrainians clearly understand what's at stake. but maybe people in Western Europe have forgotten what's at stake because World War II was now a long time ago. Or people in Canada don't quite understand because the last time they had a fight on their shores was 1812. So I don't know what the answer is, but if there is a hope for defending democracy, maybe it is in Eastern Europe, Ukraine and the post-Soviet countries. This was the thought, not so much a question.
Yeah, just to say, I'm not so sure that the Western Europe is less prepared, or maybe it has just a different perspective. And geography plays a big role. Because if you are very close, you are very scared about being invaded, actually invaded. If you are very far, maybe you are not scared about being invaded, maybe you are scared about something else. For example, a nuclear conflict or something else.
Sure.
And so the elite from Western Europe, I think they have a different scale of priorities. And in the end, I think they did pretty much the right thing, as we were saying before, maybe late, maybe not fully, but in the end, they did the right thing. We are still helping Ukraine at the end.
Yeah.
Yes, I completely agree with my colleagues and with you actually that the future of power in Europe lies in Eastern Europe, which is not only Eastern Europe now, because we used to divide Europe in old and new Europe, and usually new Europe and with hardliners on Russia, we used to include Baltics and Poles. And now, in order to understand this new geopolitical axis that is emerging in Europe, together United Kingdom and Central, East and North Europe. So it's not only about Poland or Baltics, it's about also Slovakia, for example. It's enough to have a look on a graph which describes who and how many weapons are sending to Ukraine in terms of GDP, and you see that the first 10 countries are from Eastern, Central, and North Europe, and of course UK. And you see clearly in that graph that kind of power shift. Now on US election, the risk is there. But then I want to be also optimistic for two reasons. One is unpredictability, and unpredictability of Trump.
I want to find out.
Yeah, it's kind of
It's my thing.
it kind of will be more mess for the US, but my primarily like the worries and thoughts goes to Ukraine and how we win this war, and then also it was Trump who signed the delivery of the weapons, which was vetoed for a long time by the Democrats and by Obama. Then there were other scandals connected with the Hunter Biden and so on. But still, I mean, there is a margin of unpredictability. And then another reason for hope and optimism that out there is a stupid guy called Putin, which will do everything in order to keep us united. And I'm pretty sure of this.
Very good.
More questions?
May I only say one thing about what you just said? Among the readings that I've been doing in this past 2 years, thanks to what happened in Ukraine and what is happening now, is rediscovering My Europe by Czesław Miłosz. And there is a beautiful page written in the 50s, which basically says what you just said, saying, I am here in Geneva or in Lausanne, so in the French-speaking area of Switzerland, in the heart of Western Europe, surrounded by other Western intellectuals and friends of mine, in a spirit of solidarity and friendship. And we are having a very brilliant conversation with nice people and friends. But whenever I close my eyes while they're speaking, and I've learned to speak very well the French, I learned how to behave as a Western European. I close my eyes and I see pogroms, deportations, mass gravings, the bloodlands that Timothy Snyder has been writing about so much. And this is a divide that right now, he said in the late 50s, still is like a huge divide between a Western European and an Eastern European. I believe that if we were very much late in closing this gap, what is happening to Ukraine and the incredible and brave experience of the new Ukrainian nation is helping us close this gap, because it is time now that also culturally Western Europe and Western world, but especially Western Europe, turns, and it's doing like that. What you were referring about the fears by the French, I could say it also culturally, that it is time not to look condescendingly somehow from West to East, because Eastern Europe is injecting way more European values and energies into the European system than Western Europe was and is doing. And this is great news, it's not bad news. It's rejuvenating our spirit. I look at it, even personally, as something that, you know, is changing myself, and I think it's changing our debate.
New risorgimento of Europe.
Maybe.
New risorgimento.
That would be great.
Yes, with Ukraine.
Guys, yes.
Thank you. I stayed in Italy for 1 year and a half, and I just returned in Ukraine. And when I was in Italy, I feel that a huge amount of people still think that it's not a Russia attack Ukraine, it's just war of Ukraine.
You are aware more.
Yes, so demonstrate about it, but you said that Italian are under influence of Russian propaganda, also Italian propaganda, Italian politicians, but it seems for me that it's also economical question and culture question, because Italy makes a lot of money of Russian tourists, and I saw a side of respect for Russian culture, and for me it seems more like a choice of Italian that they still communicate with Russia, and it's not just influence of propaganda.
Yeah, opportunism, yes.
Just an add-on, I cannot explain why, for example, Spain and Italy were kind of a different ownership, because you could have expected the same. They're far away, Mediterranean countries, languages are close to each other, both have experience.
Yes.
Yeah.
Russia is more powerful.
Russia is more powerful economically.
Than Spain.
Okay.
Yes.
More ideas, more questions?
More beautiful than Spain. Maybe culture, I don't know.
I just think that you explained how much problems do we have with a lot of countries in the European Union, even the world. Like we have problems with China, with India, with Sweden, so a lot of far rights, even elections, and we know how to explain why they won, because there was problem with coalition, with political system, with culture, with economical stuff, but like which ways, like if you defend the liberal democracy, as I understand, which ways do you see to prevent those parties to rise up and won the elections? Because you explain the problems that can be next year, next 10 years, when China grows up, Putin and Russia is still on their way. So what ways, like what practical ways for the governments or for coalitions, USA, do you see to prevent those situations from happening? And are you optimistic on that, or do you see the way to the future with liberal democracy?
I will say a few words to our colleague here in the third row. Economically speaking, Italy was completely and totally dependent, energy speaking, was totally dependent to Russia, thanks to Berlusconi's government. And Spain was not. again, geography is a key, or even on this situation. Thanks to Prime Minister Mario Draghi, who actually led the European delegation with Macron and Scholz here to Kiev. We cut all the ties, most of the ties, but now we are not dependent anymore with Russia. So this is changing, and that actually is already changing. But again, the other thing that is different between us and Spain is again the Communist Party. And also, until 1979, there was a fascist dictatorship in Spain. So for them, until yesterday, Russia, the Soviet Union was, the end. In Italy, it was completely different. And talking about culture, really, we didn't know there was a difference between Ukraine, Georgia, and Moscow, because the propaganda, all we got from also newspapers, books, cultural events, was that Soviet Union was just one thing, because the colonial part of the history, the history of these places, as Francesco said earlier, I mean, it's kind of we didn't care. We didn't think that was a colonialism or imperialism. We thought that was a Russia thing. When Chernobyl happened, we thought it was in Russia.
Yes.
And we thought that Ukraine was
a mere geographical accident.
Yeah, a region of Russia. And of course, we didn't get any writers or musicians or painters, because they actually were killed by the Russians. And so that is the main thing. This is a cultural thing. It's very deeply rooted in our culture. But this is changing. Even, I mean, I agree with you. If you turn on the TV, there is Russian propaganda on all the stations. 3 of them are owned by Berlusconi's family, and the other 3 are public run. And of course, on this time, the right-wing coalition is in power, and they are, they think that Russia has some reasons, even if Giorgia Meloni stands with Ukraine. Remember that in Italy, even in Moscow, Alexander Dugin was like a pariah because was too extremist in some ways. Alexander Dugin was
our best guest.
Yeah, he was invited by political conferences. He was on TV. The TV station run by the actual now culture minister of culture, Gennaro San Giuliano. He is now he's the minister of culture. He was a journalist, and he was the editor-in-chief of one of the main TV stations. He had public TV station. He had, I guess, 2 or 3 times Alexander Dugin in studio. So that's of course. He's a star in Italy. When his daughter was killed,
And he wrote a book on
the minister of culture, this guy Gennaro San Giuliano, he wrote 2 biographies. I would say 2 hagiographies. One about Putin and the other one about Trump. And if you read these books, you cannot believe it, because you don't believe them, because they are really Russian propaganda, or in the case of Trump, Russian propaganda. And so this guy is the Minister of Culture. And he was appointed by Giorgia Meloni, who is a close friend to your president. So it's weird.
Complicated.
Yeah, I have a very different perspective, and I'll offer you a very different idea about tourism from what you were saying before. Tourism, everybody think about Italy as a country in which tourism is super important and stuff. I think tourism is like 4% of Italian GDP, something like that. It's very small part of Italian economy. Russian tourism is like, I think, 0 point something of Italian tourism. It's basically just like, I don't know, a couple of thousands of people in Italy live with Russian tourism, something like that. So I don't think the economy has almost anything to do. Gas is super important, but it's not something that you as a common person, you feel that it's something that it's coming from Russia. You simply have your heating and you don't know where the gas is coming from. It's not like...
No, when the bill raised...
Yeah, but this winter the bill...
Is it not colored with the colors of the Russian flag?
No, they tried, but it didn't work. And it's not like working for a company that makes all this business with Russia, which you are, even if you are like a worker, you know for who you are working for, and you have like a much more direct interest. And if we and I will make another distinction between elite, and especially intellectual elite, political elite, and common people. When we are talking about political elite, what was Christian was saying before, it's very important. The inheritance of the Communist Party, not more generally of the inheritance of the leftists, it's very important. I know a lot of very good people on the left, and they in each conflict in the world, they side with the weakest part, and they are very moral, and they are making an incredible mental gymnastic to find a way not to stay on the Ukrainian side. Because they have this kind of, I don't know what to say, it's like a brain tumor, it's like they have this inheritance of the past.
They think Russians are weak, poor, and strong.
And especially if the United States is siding with someone, that one must be the bad guy. That's
pure anti-Americanism.
But this is something very, I think it's very related to the intellectual elite and political elite. If you're talking about common people, I think that the main reason why you would say I'm speeding up numbers, I don't remember the last poll, but the main reason why you say you can see a poll in Italy in which like 50% of the people is not completely convinced of the mainstream version of what's happening in this country. It's not because they have an economical interest, it's not because they were former voters of the Communist Party. I think it's simply because it's what the great part of the political spectrum and the media establishment is saying to them, and they don't trust the politicians and they don't trust the media. Because, and here you can find also the difference with Spain, because if you look at how much the Spanish trust their media and their political elite, they trust them much more than the Italians trust them. I think simply because Spain is a much younger democracy, and it had like the last 25 years in Spain were much better for the Spaniards than the last 25 years for the Italians. Italians, it's a generation since we knew that young Italians would live in worse condition than their parents. I was born in 1985, and I knew that since I was able to think those kind of things. And in Spain, it's not like that. Spain had many booms, economic boom, and then after the great financial crisis, they recovered much quicker than Italy. So I think that the point is that if, for example, tomorrow, for some kind of spell, the entire Italian media landscape and the entire political elite will start saying Putin is the good guy and it's the Ukrainian that invaded Russia, I think that the majority of Italians will start thinking, maybe there is something good in those Ukrainians. Maybe they are the good ones.
Sorry. Maybe you are not interested in our Italian fights. I think so. But I think that I would like to be mainstream, fighting, supporting Ukraine, but I'm not. So it's like the opposite that you are saying, because it's the Russia propaganda, or maybe not so, clear propaganda, but I think that the message that the skepticism against Ukraine and the doubt that maybe we have to negotiate with Putin and we have to make some concession, I think is more relevant than our fighting support.
Absolutely.
Well, it's a mix of a lot of things. Now, there's the issue of leftists being anti-American, being anti-NATO. There is an issue of culture of pacifism, which is very strong in Italy, and them siding traditionally against US, and in this war automatically it means siding against Ukraine. There is a real kind of lack of knowledge about the region, about Russia. They say they know Russia, but they don't. I mean, they say they adore Dostoevsky, but I'm not sure they haven't even read something of Dostoevsky. But there is there are then some taboos because of the absence of knowledge about the colonization, and we are there. There is the absence of the discourse of decolonization. You cannot discuss kind of the colonization character of Dostoevsky or Pushkin, for example, because they are untouchable. So they are too painful to them to discuss, and when you start to speak about that, then you are Russophobic. Which is kind of also diffused kind of idea, also not only in Italy, but in some other countries. But Italy, in a way, if you look, for example, the polls that EU Barometer is conducting from European Parliament, Italy is always on the last place when it comes to the question about the support to Ukraine, especially about the military support to Ukraine. It's almost like a 50-50, 48% agree, and others are against. And with this, yes, unfortunately, I agree with Paula that unfortunately we are not mainstream. The mainstream idea is that so we are in opposition. I mean, in a sense, we are not majority in the country. So the absolute majority of Italians, I am pretty much sure that they want ceasefire now. They want to freeze the conflict, if not to give Crimea and Donbass. They don't even know what Donbass is, and actually what kind of territory Donbass encompasses. And they never got the news that actually Putin never has conquered the entire Donbass, and there was only Donetsk and Lugansk self-proclaimed territories, and now he gets some other territories, but that he never got the entire Donbass. No, but they are really Italians to leave also the entire Donbass to Russia. And this is unfortunately the mood, and this is because, let's leave us in peace. This is the kind of, because Italy's foreign policy is this, that let's be a friend with everyone, in a sense that when it comes, for example, about the visa liberalization process inside the European Union back in 2017, when the EU had to decide whether to concede it to Ukraine and Georgia 1 year before it gave to Moldova. I remember that our ambassadors in Brussels, they would say that they had no problems with Italy. Italy was not opposed. Italy will not oppose, for example, EU enlargement, will never oppose to include Ukraine in European Union. But then Italy needs also to think how to include Russia in European security, and in a illusional world also in the European Union. And they don't understand that maybe it's us who we really want to see a peaceful Russia, because Russia will remain always a problem for us, and geographically it will be there always, and Russia will have to undergo a long process of decolonization, and very particular decolonization, because it is a singular case of internal and external colonization. No? In difference with many other colonies because there are so many ethnicities and so many languages and so many types of internal colonization of Russia. And when I see and hear now the Russian liberals, also those who are now pro-Ukrainian and genuinely understand that Ukrainians now are fighting also paradoxically for them and for their freedom, still I never forget an interview with a Chechen journalist of one Russian guy, and the Chechen journalist was complaining about some liberal Russians, and she would say that I heard a very respected liberal, Russian liberals who is there watching TV and kind of hoping for Ukraine to win this war, but at the same time saying that I really do hope that the Bucha massacre was done by Chechens and not by Russians. And this is when I have then no hope, you know, that there will be a freedom for Russia in the nearest future. So it will be a long process, and it will be a long process also for Europe to learn how to live with that kind of Russia.
Also, Italy is not only the place of the strongest communist party in the Western world, not only the place where Alexander Dugin was a TV star, not only the place where Gennaro San Giuliano is the current Minister of Culture, it's only the place where the Pope lived. But it's too late.
To give you other bad news.
It's better not to open the discussion.
So, the next season of our TV series discussion in PEN Ukraine and Ukraine World will be about the Pope. But it's so fantastic that we are really living in the world of schizophrenia. The old communists love Putin. Putinist Russia is the complete opposite of anything that communism was about. And they invite Dugin, which is a clear far-right fascist. It's nice. So, interesting world, unfortunately tragic world, but the brave world, and thank you again for coming. And
Thank you.
And remember, I forgot to tell that on the walls you have these QR codes, which lead to our, actually, my volunteer cards, on which we collect funds to buy cards for the frontline. The tragic thing is sometimes the cars we bring to the front line are destroyed. And one of the cars we recently brought, thanks to you, thanks to all the donations, it went over the anti-tank mine and was completely burned down, and tragically one person was killed and two others were heavily wounded. So this is also gives us that we talk here peacefully, but about very difficult things, but thanks to our army and thanks to our soldiers. And we really thank to them with all our hearts, but we need to also participate as civilians. Thank you so much. Thank you for coming.